September 11th, 1945. San Francisco Bay. The military transport ship groaned against the dock, its hull scraping wood and metal in a sound that echoed across the water like a dying animal. Below deck in the medical hold, where the air hung thick with the smell of iodine and suffering, Keiko Yamada lay perfectly still. Not because she chose to, because she could not move. She stared at the ceiling, counting the rivets in the metal above her head. 43. She had counted them 1,000 times during the voyage from Manila. Her hands gripped the edge of the cot knuckles, white the only part of her body she could still control with certainty. From the waist down there was nothing. No sensation, no movement, just a terrible absence where her legs used to be. Through the porthole near her cot, she could see slices of America, buildings that touched the clouds, cars lined up like toys. The Golden Gate Bridge rising in the distance, its towers catching the afternoon sun like monuments to some impossible dream. She had been taught that Americans were monsters, devils with human faces, men who would finish what her own people had started in that jungle camp 3 months ago. The beating that had shattered her spine, the punishment for trying to escape. The moment everything ended, footsteps approached her cot, American voices, English words she barely understood. She braced herself for what would come next, for the hatred she had been promised, for the revenge that would be their right. And then the medic spoke. His voice was gentle. "We're going to take care of you now," he said through a translator. "You're safe." In that moment, lying on a cot in the belly of a ship in San Francisco Bay, Keiko Yamada realized that everything she had been taught was a lie. And that realization was more terrifying than any beating, more disorienting than any injury. Because if the enemy could show kindness, then what did that make her? What did that make everyone who had believed the propaganda? What did that make the war itself? The propaganda had been beautiful in its simplicity. Americans were beasts, less than human, creatures without souls or mercy. Keiko had grown up on these images. Posters showing American soldiers with fangs and claws. Radio broadcasts describing their savagery. Teachers explaining that the Western devils understood only violence, only domination, only cruelty. She had believed it all. Why would she not? She was 20 when the war began, a nursing student in Osaka learning her craft in a world that was already preparing for conflict. The war had seemed distant at first, something happening in China, something the soldiers talked about in low voices, something that did not concern young women studying anatomy and wound care in quiet hospital corridors. Then Pearl Harbor, then the declarations, then the mobilization. Then the draft notices that came for everyone, even for young women who had only wanted to heal. The Japanese Imperial Army Medical Corps took her in 1942. She was 21 years old. They gave her a uniform, a rank and orders. She was to serve at a military hospital in Manila, treating wounded soldiers as the empire expanded across the Pacific. She had no choice in the matter. None of them did. You served or you disappeared. Those were the only options in Imperial Japan during the war years. Manila had been different than she expected. The hospital was large, well-equipped, functional. The wounded came in waves. Boys, really. 17, 18, 19 years old. Missing limbs, faces burned beyond recognition. Screaming in the night from pain that morphine could not touch. She had learned to work without sleeping, to dress wounds with supplies that were already running low, to watch young men die, and then move on to the next patient, because there was always a next patient. By 1945, everything was falling apart. The Americans were coming, everyone knew it. The supply lines had been cut, medicine was running out, food was scarce. The hospital staff could see the writing on the wall written in blood and fire, and the distant sounds of artillery that grew louder every day. The United States had built a war machine unlike anything the world had ever seen. By 1944, American factories were producing more war material than all other nations combined. The arsenal of democracy, they called it. 18,000 aircraft in 1942, 96,000 in 1944. Liberty ships rolling off assembly lines in weeks rather than months. Oil production that dwarfed the rest of the world. America produced 1.8 billion barrels in 1944. Germany managed 33 million. Japan even less. Keiko knew none of these numbers. She only knew that the supplies stopped coming, that the wounded kept arriving, that the American planes flew overhead with impunity, their engines droning like angry gods, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop them. When Manila fell in February 1945, chaos descended like a flood. The hospital was overrun, not by Americans, but by retreating Japanese forces. Men who had lost everything. Men who had been promised victory and received only defeat. Men whose minds had broken under the weight of what they had seen and done. Keiko and 7 other nurses were captured by a unit that had gone rogue. These were not organized soldiers following orders. These were men cut off from command, hiding in the jungle, refusing to surrender even as their empire crumbled around them. They called themselves the Defenders of Honor. In reality, they were broken men looking for someone to blame, someone to punish someone who could bear the weight of their shame and rage. The nurses were accused of treason, of treating American prisoners with too much care, of showing compassion to the enemy, of betraying the empire by following the Hippocratic Oath instead of orders. Keiko had treated wounded Americans. She had done her job. She had bandaged their wounds and given them water and tried to ease their suffering because that was what nurses did. That was what healing meant. For this, she was declared a traitor. The camp they built was barely a camp at all, just a clearing in the Philippine jungle surrounded by bamboo and barbed wire, and the endless green that seemed to swallow light and hope in equal measure. The air was thick enough to drown in. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds. The rain came every afternoon, turning the ground to mud that sucked at their feet and never dried. They were given 1 meal a day, rice when there was rice, weevils and all. Sometimes just water with a few grains floating in it, a mockery of soup. Keiko watched women she had worked beside for 3 years begin to waste away, their cheeks hollowing, their eyes growing too large for their faces, their bodies consuming themselves for fuel. And the beatings. The beatings came without warning, without reason, without end, for looking at a guard wrong, for speaking without permission, for being too slow, too loud, too quiet, too anything. The guards used bamboo rods, rifle butts, their fists, their boots. They beat the nurses the way you would beat an animal, with the casual cruelty of men who no longer saw human beings in front of them. Keiko tried to escape once. Just once. It was July, 3 months into their captivity. 3 months of watching her friends die. 3 months of starvation and fear, and the slow realization that no one was coming to save them, that they had been forgotten by the world. She and 2 other nurses slipped away in the night. They crawled through mud and underbrush, moving inch by inch toward what they hoped were American lines. They could hear artillery in the distance, see flares lighting up the sky. Freedom was close. So close they could taste it. They were caught before dawn, dragged back to the camp. The other 2 nurses were executed immediately, bayoneted in front of everyone, their screams cut short, their bodies left in the mud as a warning. Keiko was brought before Sergeant Nakamura. She would never forget his face, thin as a skeleton, his uniform hanging off his frame, his eyes completely dead. A man who had stopped being human somewhere along the way and become something else. Something hollow and cruel and beyond redemption. "You will learn," he said, just 3 words. Then he nodded to the soldiers behind him. They used a wooden beam thick as her arm, heavy as sin. The first blow knocked her to the ground. She tasted mud and blood. The second blow struck her lower back, and something inside her cracked. Not a sound she heard, a sensation she felt. Like ice breaking, like a door slamming shut. The third blow hit the same place. She heard the crack that time, heard it and felt it, and knew in some deep instinctive way that something fundamental had just broken inside her body. She does not remember the 4th blow, or the 5th, or how many came after. She remembers the pain. She remembers screaming until her voice gave out. She remembers the world going dark. When she woke up, she was lying in the mud. It was night or maybe day. She could not tell anymore. The other prisoners had carried her to the shelter they shared. They had tried to make her comfortable. There was nothing they could do for her back. No medicine, no bandages, nothing but prayers and hope, and the knowledge that hope was the cruelest thing of all. Keiko tried to move her legs. Nothing happened. She tried again. Nothing. She looked down at her body and willed her feet to move her toes, to wiggle anything. But the connection had been severed. The pathway from brain to limb was broken, and no amount of willpower could repair it. I cannot feel my legs, she whispered to the woman beside her, Michiko, a nurse from Kyoto who had been her friend for 3 years. Michiko did not say anything. There was nothing to say. They both knew what it meant. In the jungle in a prison camp with no medical care, paralysis was a death sentence. A slow one, but certain. Keiko lived in that state for 3 months. Unable to move, unable to walk, lying in the mud and rain, feeling her body waste away, waiting for death to come. She developed bed sores, infections, her muscles atrophied. Her mind retreated to places where the pain could not reach. She watched Michiko die in early September. Starvation and dysentery. Her friend simply grew weaker and weaker until one morning she did not wake up. Keiko could not even cry anymore. She was beyond tears, beyond grief, beyond everything except the basic animal function of breathing in and out. 3 days after Michiko died, American soldiers arrived. Not prisoners, not beaten men, but armed soldiers with clean uniforms and weapons that worked, and the confidence of an army that had already won. The rogue unit tried to fight. It lasted about 30 seconds. The Americans cut through them like a knife through paper. The jungle clearing filled with the sound of gunfire, and then it was over. The guards who had terrorized them for months were dead or fleeing, and American soldiers were moving through the camp, staring at what they found with expressions of horror and rage. An American medic knelt beside Keiko. He was young, maybe 22, freckles across his nose, dirt under his fingernails. He looked at her and his face went pale. "Jesus Christ," he said. Then he called for a stretcher. They carried her out of that jungle, out of the green hell that had been her prison for 3 months. They loaded her onto a truck, then a plane, then a ship. She barely remembered any of it. It all blurred together into a fevered dream of movement and voices and the slow dawning realization that she was going to live, that they were saving her, that the monsters had turned out to be saviors, and the saviors had turned out to be monsters, and the world made no sense anymore. The voyage to San Francisco took 3 weeks. Keiko spent it in the medical hold surrounded by wounded American soldiers, men who had fought against her country, men who had every reason to hate her. But when they looked at her, she saw only pity. Sometimes anger at what had been done to her, but never hatred for her personally. One soldier, a young man missing his left arm, had given her a small nod as she was wheeled past, a gesture of recognition. One broken person to another, one victim of war to another. It had almost made her cry. Now the ship was docked. Now America was outside. Now she was about to find out what came next. Letterman General Hospital rose against the San Francisco sky like a monument to order in a world gone mad. White, clean, enormous. Keiko had never seen a building so large devoted entirely to healing. In Japan, hospitals were modest structures, functional, efficient. But this was something else. This was a temple built to the religion of medicine, and every surface gleamed with the faith that broken things could be fixed. They wheeled her through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. White walls, white floors, white uniforms on nurses who moved with purpose and precision. The smell was overwhelming. Not the rot and decay of the jungle camp, but antiseptic, disinfecting cleanliness so profound it was almost aggressive. Her eyes watered. Her stomach turned. After months of filth, the purity of it was alien. She passed rooms filled with wounded soldiers, boys with bandages wrapped around their heads, men missing legs learning to walk on prosthetics. A ward full of burned victims, their skin grafted and scarred and slowly healing under the care of nurses who changed their dressings with hands as gentle as prayer. Some of the soldiers looked at her as she passed. A few turned away. One young man, his chest wrapped in bandages, stared at her with undisguised hatred. She did not blame him. How many of his friends had died fighting her country? How many nightmares did he carry from islands whose names she would never know? But others nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement. We are all broken here. We are all victims of the same machine. Welcome to the ward of the wounded. They brought her to their private room. Keiko stared at it in disbelief. A room, a private room, with a real bed, with clean white sheets, with a window that looked out over a courtyard where flowers grew. Actual flowers, color in a world that had been gray for so long she had forgotten what beauty looked like. A young nurse with gentle hands lifted Keiko into the bed as if she mattered. "You are safe now," she said in halting Japanese. Keiko wanted to believe her, but belief felt like a forgotten skill. Dr. William Carter arrived an hour later, gray-haired, calm, precise, accompanied by Grace, a Japanese-American translator. He examined Keiko's spine carefully, watching every flicker of pain. Below her ribs, she felt nothing. "I have not felt my legs since the beating," she whispered. Something hardened in Carter's eyes. Tests followed, X-rays outlining fractures, blood work revealing starvation and anemia. Keiko was barely alive. In a wood-paneled conference room, 12 doctors debated her fate. "She might not survive anesthesia," warned Dr. Mercer. "But if we do not try," argued Dr. Phillips, "we condemn her to a lifetime in a wheelchair." Carter finally spoke. "She is an enemy prisoner, but she is also human. If we can help, we must." The room agreed they would operate. In the days before surgery, Keiko regained strength through careful meals and transfusions. Nurses brushed her hair and turned her gently. Dr. Carter explained the risks with quiet honesty. She accepted them. "Even if it kills me," she said. The night before surgery, city lights glittered beyond her window. "Are you afraid?" the nurse named Mary asked. "Yes," Keiko admitted, "of surviving and never walking again." The operation began before dawn and lasted 19 hours. Her spine was worse than expected, but in the 12th hour, a nurse gasped. Her toe moved. When Keiko woke, Dr. Carter whispered, "Try again." Her toe twitched. She wept. But that moment of triumph was still weeks away. First, Keiko had to understand where she was, what America truly meant, and whether the kindness she had been shown was real or just another kind of prison. On her third day at Letterman, a different kind of encounter would teach her more about America than any propaganda poster ever could. It started with breakfast. A hospital orderly, a large man with kind eyes and an Alabama accent, brought her a tray. The smell hit her first. Rich, savory, utterly foreign, scrambled eggs yellow as sunshine, strips of bacon crispy and glistening with fat, toast with real butter melting into the bread, orange juice in a glass so clean it sparkled, coffee that smelled like paradise. Keiko stared. "This is for me," she asked through Grace. The orderly, whose name tag read Charlie, smiled. "Yes, ma'am, you need to eat. Build your strength." "But I am enemy." Charlie looked at her, really looked at her. Not at her nationality, not at her uniform, at her. "Lady," he said slowly so Grace could translate, "the war is over. Right now, you are just someone who needs help. And in America, that is what we do. We help." Keiko lifted a piece of bacon to her lips. The smell filled her nose. Smoky, rich, salty. She took a bite. The taste exploded in her mouth. Fat and salt and smoke, and something indefinable. Something that tasted like abundance. Like a country that had so much food it could waste it on beauty, on flavor, on making even breakfast a small celebration. It was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted, and she started to cry. Not from sadness, from the terrible realization that if they could make food this good, if they could give it freely to an enemy prisoner, then everything she had been taught was not just wrong. It was a lie so complete, so fundamental, that it called into question every belief she had ever held. Grace sat beside her, holding her hand while she wept over bacon and eggs. "It is all right," Grace said softly. "Everyone cries the first time. The first time they realize that the propaganda was lying. That America is not what they said." "What is it then?" Keiko asked through tears. Grace thought for a moment. "America is complicated. It is flawed. It makes terrible mistakes. But at its heart, when you strip away everything else, America is the idea that people deserve dignity, that even your enemy is still a person, that mercy is not weakness, it is strength." That afternoon, Keiko met the man who would become an unlikely friend. Sergeant Thomas Thompson wheeled himself past her room. He was 24 years old, missing his left arm. His face was hard, his eyes harder. He stopped when he saw her. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, enemy to enemy, victim to victim. Then Thompson spat on the floor and wheeled away. Grace sighed. "He lost his arm at Iwo Jima, Japanese grenade. He lost 40 men from his unit. He is not ready to forgive." "I understand," Keiko said, and she did. How could she not? She had lost Michiko, lost Tomoko and Akiko, lost 3 months of her life to a prison camp, lost the use of her legs. Everyone had lost something to this war. Everyone carried scars. The question was whether those scars would heal or fester. That night, Keiko lay in her clean bed full of American food, listening to the sounds of the hospital, footsteps in corridors, the distant murmur of voices, somewhere a radio playing big band music. Glenn Miller, Moonlight Serenade. The music was beautiful, sophisticated, hopeful, nothing like the military marches she had grown up with. This was music that believed in joy, in dancing, in a future beyond war. She thought about Machiko, about the jungle, about Sergeant Nakamura and his dead eyes, about the wooden beam that had broken her spine, about 3 months of paralysis and mud and waiting to die. And then she thought about the American medic with freckles who had called for a stretcher, about Dr. Carter who had decided to operate even though she was the enemy, about Charlie who had brought her bacon and eggs, about Grace who held her hand while she cried. She thought about the young pilot she had cared for in Manila, the one who had died in her arms whispering thanks in English she did not understand but whose meaning was universal. She thought about all the propaganda, all the lies, all the hatred that had been fed to her like poison day after day, year after year, and she realized something that would change her forever. The war had not been about good versus evil. It had been about systems, about machines, about governments that turned human beings into weapons and then acted surprised when those weapons destroyed everything they touched. But underneath the systems, underneath the governments and the propaganda and the uniforms, there were just people, people who bled, people who suffered, people who could choose in small moments to show kindness or cruelty. And America, for all its flaws, for all its contradictions, had built a system that encouraged its people to choose kindness. Not always, not perfectly, but more often than not. That was the real terror of it. Not that Americans were monsters, but that they were not. That they were just people like her who had been taught to see the enemy as less than human. But unlike her own leaders, American leaders had also taught their people that mercy was a virtue, that saving lives mattered, that even the enemy deserved basic human dignity. It was a revolutionary idea, and it was working, here, in this hospital, in the way nurses treated her wounds with the same care they gave American soldiers, in the way Dr. Carter had looked at her x-rays and seen not a Japanese enemy, but a broken spine that needed fixing. Keiko fell asleep that night thinking about what it meant to be saved by people you had been taught to hate, and what responsibility that created, what debt of truth she now owed. When she went home to Japan, if she went home, she would carry this knowledge with her. This terrible, beautiful knowledge that the enemy had shown her more mercy than her own people. That truth would either heal her or destroy her. She did not yet know which, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would never eat bacon and eggs again without crying, without remembering the moment she realized that everything she believed was a lie, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act in the world is simply treating your enemy like a human being. Tomorrow, Dr. Carter would explain the surgery, the risks, the chances, the possibility that she might die on the operating table or wake up still paralyzed, having survived 19 hours of surgery only to remain trapped in a body that would not obey. But tonight she was alive. She was clean. She was fed. She was safe. And for a girl who had spent 3 months lying in mud waiting to die, that was more than enough. It was everything. Dr. William Carter stood in his office long after the sun had set over San Francisco Bay. On his desk sat a photograph in a simple wooden frame. A young man in Navy uniform, dark hair, bright eyes, the kind of smile that suggested he believed the world was fundamentally good. James Carter, 22 years old, missing in action. Okinawa, June 1945, presumed dead. Carter picked up the photograph, running his thumb along the glass as he had done every night for the past 4 months. He knew every detail by heart, the way James's hair never quite stayed in place, the small scar above his left eyebrow from falling off his bicycle when he was 7, the crooked front tooth he had refused to get fixed because it made him look, he said, more interesting. Gone now, all of it, blown apart by Japanese artillery while coordinating ship-to-shore communications during the bloodiest battle of the Pacific Campaign. 12,000 Americans dead at Okinawa, 36,000 wounded. The Japanese had fought with fanatic determination. Kamikaze attacks that turned young pilots into missiles. Last stands that ended in mass suicide charges. No surrender, no mercy, just death upon death upon death. They had never found James's body. That was perhaps the worst part. No grave to visit, no closure. Just the terrible knowledge that somewhere on that blood-soaked island, his son's remains lay scattered among the rocks and coral slowly being reclaimed by the earth. And now in the hospital below lay a Japanese nurse, 24 years old, paralyzed, broken by her own army for the crime of showing compassion. Carter set the photograph back on his desk. He thought about the Hippocratic oath he had taken 30 years ago. First, do no harm. That was the foundation of everything. The sacred promise that separated doctors from soldiers and healing from killing, civilization from barbarism. But what did that oath mean when the patient was your enemy? When every time you looked at her face, you saw the faces of the men who killed your son? Carter poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, sat in the darkness of his office, listened to the sounds of the hospital settling into night, footsteps in corridors, the distant beep of medical equipment, the low murmur of nurses changing shifts. His wife Margaret had asked him that afternoon what he was going to do about the Japanese girl. I do not know, he had told her honestly. You are thinking about James, Margaret said. It was not a question. I think about James every moment of every day. Would he want you to save her? That was the question, was it not? What would James want? What would his son, who had died fighting this woman's country, want his father to do? Carter pulled out a letter from his desk drawer. The paper was worn from handling. James's last letter, written in May 1945, a month before the invasion of Okinawa. He read it again, though he had memorized every word. Dear Dad, we are preparing for Okinawa. Everyone says it is going to be bad, real bad, but I am not afraid to die. I am afraid of what hate will do if we win. I have seen what it does to men over here. Turns them into something less than human. They stop seeing the enemy as people, start seeing them as targets, as things to destroy. Dad promised me something. When this is over, no matter what happens to me, keep saving lives. Show them that Americans are better than what they think. Show them mercy. That is how we really win. Not by killing more of them than they kill of us, but by showing we are better than the worst thing they believe about us. Love, James. Carter folded the letter carefully, put it back in his pocket, close to his heart. He knew what he had to do. The next morning, 12 doctors assembled in the wood-paneled conference room on the 3rd floor of Letterman General Hospital. X-rays hung on light boxes around the room, showing Keiko Yamada's shattered spine in stark black and white. Colonel Harrison, the hospital commander, called the meeting to order. Gentlemen, we are here to discuss the case of patient-Y-473, Japanese national, former Imperial Army nurse, currently paralyzed from the waist down due to spinal trauma inflicted by her own forces. Dr. Richard Mercer spoke first. He was in his 50s, conservative, methodical. Her vitals are terrible. She is severely malnourished, anemic, multiple infections. She might not survive anesthesia. We would be taking a significant risk. Dr. Paul Phillips, younger and more idealistic, countered immediately. If we do not try, we condemn a 24-year-old woman to spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair. That is also a death sentence, just a slower one. A Japanese woman, interjected Dr. Stevens, while we still have American boys waiting for operations. I have patients who fought at Guadalcanal, at Iwo Jima. They see a Japanese nurse getting treatment. They see the people who killed their friends. The room erupted in overlapping voices. Dr. Samuel Klein, a Jewish refugee who had lost family in the concentration camps, raised his hand for silence. When the room quieted, he spoke softly. As someone who knows what happens when we decide who deserves medical care based on ethnicity or nationality, I cannot be part of that decision. I cannot be part of drawing that line. Because once you draw it, where does it stop? Colonel Harrison cleared his throat. Let us be practical, gentlemen. She is an enemy prisoner of war. What are the political optics of spending precious surgical resources on a Japanese national when we have American servicemen still requiring care? Carter had been silent until now. He stood slowly. Gentlemen, before we vote, I need to tell you something. The room turned to him. My son died at Okinawa. James Carter, 22 years old, Navy signalman, killed by Japanese naval fire on June 15, 1945. Stunned silence filled the room. Every day I see a Japanese face and I see the people who killed my boy. Every single day is a choice. Do I honor my grief or do I honor his memory? Do I become the thing that killed him or do I become the thing he died defending? Carter pulled out the letter. His hands shook slightly as he unfolded it. He read it aloud. Every word, every plea, every hope his dead son had entrusted to paper before sailing into hell. When he finished, there were tears in the room. Dr. Phillips wiped his eyes. Dr. Klein stared at the table. Even Colonel Harrison looked shaken. This girl did not kill James. Carter continued, his voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath. The war killed James, the machine that chews up young men and spits out corpses. The system that teaches people to hate each other based on lines on a map. We cannot bring him back. We cannot undo Okinawa or Bataan or Pearl Harbor or any of it. But we can save one life. We can prove that mercy is stronger than hatred. That is why we wear white coats instead of uniforms. That is why we are doctors, not soldiers. He looked around the room, meeting each man's eyes in turn. I am asking you to authorize this surgery, not despite the fact that she is Japanese, but because of it. Because if we can save the daughter of our enemy, then maybe, just maybe, James did not die for nothing. Maybe his death meant something. Maybe it meant that mercy wins. The vote was 9 in favor, 3 abstentions, 0 against. Surgery authorized for October 3rd, 1945, 6 o'clock in the morning. Carter returned to his office afterward, emotionally drained. He sat in his chair and looked at James's photograph. I hope I am doing the right thing, son, he whispered to the empty room. I hope you would be proud. The photograph offered no answer. Just that eternally young smile, that belief in a world that no longer existed. Across the hospital in a ward on the 2nd floor, Sergeant Thomas Thompson sat in his bed staring at the space where his left arm used to be. He was 24 years old, should have been in his prime, should have been strong and whole and ready to take on the world. Instead, he was half a man, broken, useless, destroyed by a war that had taken everything from him and given nothing back. The worst part was not the phantom pain, not the itching in an arm that was no longer there, not even the looks of pity from nurses who saw him as a tragic case study rather than a person. The worst part was the rage. It lived in his chest like a living thing, hot, consuming, demanding to be fed. He fed it thoughts of revenge, thoughts of every Japanese soldier he had killed at Iwo Jima, thoughts of the man who had thrown the grenade that took his arm. Thompson had bayoneted him while his own arm hung by threads of muscle, had watched the light go out of those eyes, had felt nothing but satisfaction. 40 men from his unit had died on that black sand beach. Danny, Reeves, O'Connor, Miller, boys he had trained with, eaten with, shared cigarettes and stories with. All dead now, all buried in graves marked with white crosses on an island whose name would forever mean death. And now there was a Japanese nurse in this hospital, getting treatment, getting care, getting the mercy she did not deserve. It made him sick. His roommate Jake Morrison was talking. I heard they are going to operate on her, that Japanese nurse. Carter convinced the board. Waste of resources, Thompson spat. His voice was hard, bitter. She probably cheered when American boys died, Morrison agreed. His chest was wrapped in bandages from wounds that still wept through the gauze. But Corporal Davis, the medic, who had found Keiko in the jungle camp, shook his head. You did not see that camp, Tommy. You did not see what they did to their own people. I do not care what they did to their own, Thompson said. I care about Danny, about Reeves, about the 40 men from my unit who never came home because of them. Davis was quiet for a moment. Then he said softly, she was paralyzed for trying to help American POWs. Her own army beat her so badly they broke her spine, left her to die in the mud. We found her 3 months later, barely alive. Thompson said nothing, but something in his chest shifted, just slightly, just enough to let in a sliver of doubt. That night he could not sleep. His phantom arm itched mercilessly. He wheeled himself through the quiet corridors, trying to outrun thoughts that followed him like ghosts. He found himself outside Building C, the private rooms where critical patients were housed. One door was slightly open. Light spilled into the hallway. Thompson wheeled closer. Inside he could see her, the Japanese nurse, Keiko Yamada. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Silent tears ran down her face. She made no sound, just wept quietly as if she had forgotten how to cry properly, as if tears were just another bodily function she could no longer control. Her body was skeletal. Bruises covered every visible inch of skin. Bandages wrapped infected wounds. Her legs lay motionless under the sheet dead weight attached to a living person. She looked nothing like the enemy, nothing like a soldier, nothing like the fanatic Japanese troops he had fought on Iwo Jima. She just looked broken. Thompson watched her for a long moment. Something in his chest cracked. Not healed, but cracked. The first fissure in the wall of rage he had built. He wheeled away silently troubled. Grace Nakamura found him in the hallway. "Cannot sleep either," she asked in English. Thompson looked at her. Really looked at her. She was Japanese. But she wore an American nurse's uniform, spoke perfect English, carried herself with the confidence of someone who belonged here. "You are American?" he asked, though it came out sounding like an accusation. "Yes, born in California, Watsonville. My family owned a strawberry farm." "But you are Japanese." "Japanese-American," Grace corrected gently. "There is a difference, Abidichi." Thompson was silent. Grace sat down on a bench in the hallway, gestured for him to join her. After a moment's hesitation, he wheeled closer. "After Pearl Harbor," Grace said quietly, "they came for us, gave my family 1 week to sell everything. The farm, the house, our cars, everything we had built over 30 years. They took us to Manzanar, an internment camp in the desert, barbed wire, guard towers, armed soldiers watching us like we were criminals." "You were enemy aliens," Thompson said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We were Americans. I was born here. My parents came here legally, worked legally, paid taxes, obeyed every law. But we had Japanese faces, so we were the enemy." She looked at him. Her eyes were sad, but not bitter. "My brother Takeshi joined the army, the 442 Regiment, Japanese-American soldiers. They sent him to Italy. He died at Monte Cassino, proving his loyalty to a country that had imprisoned his family." Thompson felt something in his chest tighten. "When I see that girl in there," Grace continued, nodding toward Keiko's room, "I see what hate does. Your people hated her for showing mercy to Americans. My people hated me for having a Japanese face. Hate does not care about truth. It just destroys everything it touches." "She is still Japanese," Thompson said, but weakly now. "And you are still American, and I am both. And she is a human being who was nearly beaten to death for trying to help your wounded brothers. Does that not matter?" Thompson had no answer. Grace stood to leave. Then she paused. "The war is over, Sergeant Thompson. We won. Now we get to choose what kind of victors we are. The kind who show mercy, or the kind who become the monsters we fought against." She walked away, leaving Thompson alone in the dark hallway with his thoughts and his phantom arm and the image of a broken Japanese girl crying silent tears. The days before the surgery passed in a strange rhythm. Keiko was given blood transfusions to build up her strength, IV nutrition to combat the malnutrition, antibiotics for the infections that riddled her body. Grace was there every day, translating, explaining, holding Keiko's hand during the painful procedures. On the third day, Keiko asked the question that had been haunting her. "Why do you help me? You are American. I am enemy." Grace sat down beside the bed, took a deep breath. "I help you because I understand what it means to be caught between two worlds, to be seen as the enemy by everyone, even when you are just trying to survive." She told Keiko about Manzanar, about losing everything, about her brother dying in Italy to prove a loyalty that should never have been questioned. "When I see you," Grace said, "I see myself, someone who followed her oath, someone who tried to do right in a world gone mad, someone who paid a terrible price for choosing compassion." Keiko began to cry. "I am sorry," she whispered, "for your brother, for the war, for everything my country did." Grace squeezed her hand. "I know. And that is why we are going to make sure you survive that surgery, because mercy has to win. It just has to." Dr. Carter came to explain the procedure on the evening of October 1st. He sat beside Keiko's bed and spoke plainly without false comfort. "Your spine is badly damaged. Vertebrae L2 and L3 are fractured. Bone fragments are pressing on your spinal cord. That is why you cannot move or feel your legs. Keiko nodded. She had suspected as much. The surgery will be very long, 15 to 20 hours. We will open your back, remove the bone fragments, and try to stabilize the vertebrae. If we are successful and if the spinal cord is not completely severed, you might regain some function. Might. I cannot promise anything. You might not survive the anesthesia. You might survive the surgery but remain paralyzed. You might have a stroke on the operating table. There are 100 ways this could go wrong. And if you do nothing, then you will never walk again. That is certain. Keiko closed her eyes, thought about Machiko, about 3 months in the mud, about counting rivets on a ship ceiling, about bacon and eggs in the terrible beauty of American abundance. I want to try, she said. Carter nodded. I thought you might. He stood to leave, then paused, pulled out a photograph from his pocket. This is my son, James. He died at Okinawa, killed by Japanese artillery. Keiko's breath caught. Carter continued, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. Every time I look at you, that I see the people who killed him. Every time I make rounds and pass your room, I have to choose. Do I let hatred win, or do I let mercy win? He looked at the photograph, then at Keiko. James wrote me a letter before he died. He asked me to choose mercy, to show the enemy that Americans are better than the worst things they believe about us. So I am going to operate, not despite the fact that you are Japanese, because of it. Because that is what my son died defending. The idea that every human being deserves dignity, even our enemies. He put the photograph back in his pocket. Get some rest. Surgery is at 6 o'clock Wednesday morning. After he left, Keiko lay in the darkness, overwhelmed. Dr. Carter had lost his son to her country, to her people. And yet he was going to try to save her, was going to risk his career, his reputation, everything to give her a chance at walking again. It was incomprehensible, and yet it was happening. That night, the hospital staff did something extraordinary. They wanted Keiko to experience a real American evening, something worth surviving for, something to fight toward during the long, dark hours of surgery. Grace brought a record player to her room, put on a Glenn Miller record. Moonlight Serenade filled the air with smooth, sophisticated sound. This is American music, Keiko asked. This is jazz, big band, the sound of America in the 40s, the sound of dancing and dreaming and believing in tomorrow. Keiko closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. It was nothing like the military marches she had grown up with. This was music that believed in joy, in romance, in a future worth living for. Then a nurse brought something special on a tray. This is ice cream, Grace explained. Vanilla, an American invention. Keiko had never seen anything like it. Cold, white, creamy. It looked like frozen clouds. She took a spoonful. The cold hit her tongue first. Then the sweetness, pure and rich and impossibly good. It tasted like happiness, like abundance, like a country that had so much it could turn dairy into dessert. Oh, Keiko gasped. Good, Grace smiled. It is like eating a dream. From the ward across the hall came the sound of a radio. Baseball, the World Series, Cubs versus Tigers, American voices rising and falling with the rhythm of the game. Excitement, disappointment, joy. Even wounded men could forget their pain for 9 innings. Grace tried to explain baseball. Bases, strikes, home runs. Keiko did not really understand the rules, but she understood the emotion, the camaraderie, the way sports could unite strangers in common cause. That night, lying in her clean bed full of ice cream, listening to jazz and baseball, Keiko had a revelation. America was not just powerful, not just rich, not just militarily superior. America was happy. And that happiness, that fundamental belief in the possibility of joy, even in difficult times, was more revolutionary than any political system, more powerful than any weapon. Because how do you fight people who offer you ice cream, who play music that makes you want to dance, who see their enemies suffering, and their first instinct is to help? You cannot. Not really. Not without becoming something worse than what you are fighting against. The next morning, October 2nd, 24 hours before surgery, Thompson appeared in her doorway. He did not enter, just stood there, or rather, sat there in his wheelchair. his empty left sleeve pinned neatly to his uniform. They stared at each other. Enemy to enemy, victim to victim. Thompson's face was hard, angry, but behind the anger, Keiko saw something else. Pain, loss, confusion. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it, then opened it again. I lost 40 men at Iwo Jima, he finally said. Grace translated softly. My best friend died in my arms. I killed the man who threw the grenade that took my arm, bayoneted him while I was bleeding out, and I felt nothing but satisfaction. Keiko said nothing. What could she say? I wanted to hate you, Thompson continued. I needed to hate you, because hating you meant Danny did not die for nothing, meant there was still a clear enemy, still someone to blame. He looked at his missing arm, then at her paralyzed legs. But you are just broken, like me, just another person destroyed by the same machine. He reached into his pocket with his remaining hand, pulled out something small, wheeled closer. It was an American flag pin, small, worn. My mother gave me this when I shipped out, for good luck. Did not save my arm, but it kept me alive. He leaned forward and pinned it carefully to Keiko's hospital gown. Now you, for good luck tomorrow, so you walk again. Keiko's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, she whispered. You are a good man. Thompson's face crumpled. For a moment he looked like he might cry too. No, I'm just tired. Tired of hating. Tired of being angry all the time. Tired of letting them win even after the war is over. He wheeled to the door, paused. Good luck tomorrow. I will be praying for you, even though I do not really pray anymore. Then he was gone. Keiko touched the flag pin, felt its weight, its meaning. An American soldier who had lost his arm to a Japanese grenade had given her his most precious possession, had chosen in one small moment to build a bridge instead of a wall. That night, as Keiko tried to sleep before surgery, she thought about everything that had happened since she arrived in San Francisco. The bacon and eggs, the ice cream, the jazz music, Dr. Carter's sacrifice, Grace's friendship, Thompson's flag pin. These were not the actions of monsters. These were the actions of people who believed fundamentally that mercy was stronger than hatred, that compassion was not weakness, but courage. And tomorrow she would find out if that belief was enough to give her back her legs, her life, her future. Tomorrow at 6 o'clock in the morning, Dr. William Carter would open her back and attempt the impossible. And whether she lived or died, walked or remained paralyzed, she would carry one truth with her into that operating room. America was not perfect. It had made terrible mistakes. It had imprisoned Grace's family. It had dropped fire from the sky on Japanese cities. It had killed hundreds of thousands in a war that devoured everyone it touched. But America had also built a hospital where even the enemy could be healed, had trained doctors who saw patients instead of nationalities, had created a culture where showing mercy to your enemy was seen not as betrayal, but as the highest form of patriotism. That was worth surviving for. That was worth fighting for. That was worth believing in. And as Keiko finally drifted into fitful sleep, she dreamed not of the jungle camp, or the wooden beam, or the 3 months of paralysis. She dreamed of walking, of standing on her own 2 feet, of moving through the world as a whole person again. She dreamed of telling this story, of going home to Japan and explaining what she had learned, that the enemy was not what they had been taught, that mercy was real, that redemption was possible. She dreamed of a future where the war would be a memory instead of a prison. And in the morning, that future would either become real or remain forever a dream. October 3rd, 1945, 5 o'clock in the morning. Keiko woke to darkness and the sound of footsteps in the corridor. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot the months of waiting, forgot the impossible choice she had made. Then she remembered. Surgery day. A nurse entered with a gentle knock. Mary, the young woman who had been so kind. She carried a white hospital gown folded neatly over her arm. Good morning, Mary said softly in her halting Japanese. It is time. Time. Such a small word for such an enormous moment. Time to risk everything on the skill of a man whose son her country had killed. Time to trust that mercy was real and not just another beautiful lie. Time to discover whether the human body once broken could truly be made whole again. They wheeled her through corridors that were just beginning to wake. The hospital at dawn was a different place. Quiet, contemplative, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what the day would bring. Grace walked beside the gurney holding Keiko's hand. She had been there since 4:30, despite not being scheduled to work until 8. "I will be here when you wake up," Grace promised. "No matter how long it takes." Thompson was in the hallway as they passed, sitting in his wheelchair in the pre-dawn darkness. He raised his remaining hand in a small salute, a gesture of respect, of solidarity, of hope. Dr. Carter was already in the operating room when they arrived. He had been there since 4 o'clock, reviewing x-rays one more time, going over the procedure in his mind, preparing for every contingency. He looked tired, older than his 52 years. The weight of what he was about to attempt sat heavy on his shoulders, but his hands were steady, his eyes clear, his resolve absolute. The operating room was bright, impossibly bright after the dim corridors. Lights overhead like small suns, steel instruments laid out in precise rows, machines that beeped and hummed and monitored the delicate balance between life and death. 8 people were in the room: Dr. Carter, Dr. Phillips assisting, Dr. Klein handling anesthesia, 4 nurses moving with practiced efficiency, and 1 medical student in the corner there to observe and learn. They transferred Keiko from the gurney to the operating table. The movement sent lightning bolts of pain through her spine. She gasped. "I know," Carter said quietly through Grace, who had been allowed into the prep area. "I know it hurts. Soon you will not feel anything. And then if we are very lucky and very skilled, maybe you will feel everything again." He squeezed her shoulder, a small gesture of reassurance. Grace leaned close. "I will see you on the other side." Then the anesthesia mask descended. "Count backwards from 10, Dr. Klein said. 10, Keiko whispered. She thought of Michiko, of the jungle, of bacon and eggs and ice cream and jazz music. 9. She thought of Dr. Carter's son James, of the letter asking his father to choose mercy. 8. She thought of Thompson's flag pins still attached to the gown they had just removed. 7. She thought of her mother in Osaka, her brother Hiroshi. Would she ever see them again? 6. The room began to blur. She thought of America, this strange, abundant, contradictory country that had saved her. 4. She thought of walking, of standing on her own 2 feet. 3. The world went soft around the edges. 2. She thought of mercy, of the choice between hatred and healing. 1. Everything went white. First decision at 6:07. Carter's scalpel was steady as it cut through skin and tissue. Layers peeled back like pages in a book written in blood and muscle. The body revealing its secrets slowly, carefully. "Retractors," he said quietly. His voice calm, despite the enormity of what he was attempting. The nurses moved in perfect synchronization. Instruments appeared in his hand the moment before he asked for them. A dance rehearsed 1,000 times, but never with stakes this high. The spine emerged from surrounding tissue like ancient ruins from jungle growth. Vertebrae that should have been smooth and aligned were shattered, compressed. Fragments of bone pressed into the delicate cord that carried signals from brain to body. "My God," Phillips whispered, "it is worse than the X-rays showed." Carter said nothing. He was already lost in the work, in the microscopic precision required to remove bone without severing nerves, to stabilize without destroying, to repair what had been so thoroughly broken. Hour 1 became hour 2. Hour 2 became hour 3. The medical student in the corner grew pale and had to sit down. The nurses rotated positions to keep fresh. Only Carter remained constant, focused. His entire world narrowed to the few square inches of spine under his hands. By hour 5, his back was aching, his eyes strained from the intensity of focus. But he did not stop, could not stop, because stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant that James had died for nothing. Hour 7 brought the first major complication. Carter was attempting to remove the largest bone fragment, the one embedded deepest, the one that was almost certainly causing the majority of Keiko's paralysis. His instruments closed around it, began to lift. The spinal cord hemorrhaged. Blood obscured everything. The carefully exposed surgical field disappeared under red. Pressure dropping, Klein called out. 80 over 40, 70 over 35. Suction, Carter ordered. His voice remained steady, but Phillips saw his hands tremble. Just slightly, just for a moment. The suction cleared the blood, but it kept coming, a small bleeder, almost invisible, pumping with each heartbeat. Carter's mind raced. He could try to cauterize it, but the heat might damage the spinal cord. He could try to clamp it, but the clamp might sever nerves. He thought of James, of the letter, of Mercy winning. He changed his angle of approach. Came at the fragment from the side instead of straight on. Used micro forceps he had never used in spinal surgery before. Adapted, improvised, innovated. The fragment shifted. The bleeder came into view. Carter cauterized it with 3 precise touches. The bleeding stopped. Pressure stabilizing, Klein said. Relief flooded his voice. 90 over 50, 100 over 60. The room exhaled collectively, but they were only halfway through. By hour 12, Carter's hands were cramping. Phillips offered to take over. Carter refused. Continuity mattered in surgery this delicate. One surgeon, one vision, one attempt to make whole what had been shattered. He worked through the pain, through the exhaustion, through the doubt that crept in during the darkest hours of the operation. By hour 14, the bone fragments were removed. The vertebrae stabilized with metal rods and bone grafts. The spinal cord decompressed as much as was possible given the damage. Carter began the process of closing. Layer by layer, muscle reattached to bone, tissue sutured to tissue, skin sealed over the trauma. It was 8:47 in the evening when Nurse Dorothy Chen, preparing the final sutures, suddenly gasped. "Doctor, look." Carter looked. Keiko's right toe twitched. Not a large movement, barely visible, but there, definite, real. "Did anyone else see that?" Phillips asked. His voice shook. "I saw it," Klein confirmed. Carter tested a reflex, tapped below Keiko's right knee. The foot moved, just slightly, but it moved. He tested the left side. Same response. "Oh my God," Dorothy whispered. She was crying behind her surgical mask. Carter stared at Keiko's feet, at the movement he had thought might never come, at the miracle he had barely allowed himself to hope for. "It might just be reflex," he said, but his voice carried hope despite his caution. "We will not know until she wakes up, until she tries to move them herself." He completed the final sutures at 9:05 in the evening. Total surgical time, 14 hours and 58 minutes. Carter stepped back from the table, his legs nearly buckled. Phillips caught his arm. "You did it," Phillips said quietly. "You actually did it." "We do not know yet," Carter replied. But he was looking at Keiko's toes, at the small movements that continued even as they wheeled her to recovery. In the waiting area, Grace jumped to her feet the moment Carter emerged. Still in his surgical gown, blood on his gloves, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. Behind Grace stood Thompson, Morrison, Chen. Even Kowalski had wheeled himself up from the second floor. A gathering of broken soldiers waiting to hear if Mercy had triumphed. "She survived," Carter said simply. Grace burst into tears. "But I do not know if it worked. We'll not know for days, maybe weeks. She needs to wake up, needs to heal, needs to try to." "But there is a chance," Thompson asked. Carter met his eyes, saw the desperate hope there, saw a young man who needed to believe that something good could come from all this suffering. "Yes," Carter said, "there is a chance." 5 days later, Keiko opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was the ceiling. White, familiar now. She counted rivets automatically. 43. Always 43. Pain radiated from her back. Enormous pain. But pain meant nerves were firing. Pain meant she was alive. Pain meant possibilities. Grace was asleep in a chair beside the bed. She had been there every night, refusing to leave, refusing to give up her vigil. Keiko tried to speak. Her throat was dry. She managed a small sound. Grace woke instantly. Her eyes went wide. "Keiko?" "Water," Keiko croaked. Grace held a cup to her lips. The water was cool, clean. It tasted like life. "How long?" Keiko asked. 5 days. The surgery was 5 days ago. You have been sleeping, healing." "Did it work?" Grace's face was unreadable. "We do not know yet. Dr. Carter will want to run tests." Carter arrived within minutes. He must have been sleeping in his office again. He looked like he had aged a decade in 5 days. Keiko, he said, through Grace. Can you hear me? She nodded. Do you feel pain? Yes, back hurts. Good. Pain is good. Means nerves are firing. He pulled out a small metal instrument. I am going to touch your leg. Tell me if you feel it. He touched her right calf. Keiko's breath caught. Yes, I feel something. Not strong, but something. Carter's hands trembled as he touched her left leg. And now, yes, both legs, I feel both. He set down the instrument, took a deep breath. Now try something for me. Try to move your right toe, just the toe. Do not think about it too much. Just try. Keiko focused, sent signals down pathways that had been broken for 4 months, willed her body to obey. Her right toe moved. Small, slight, but definite. Grace made a sound between a laugh and a sob. Again, Carter said. His voice was thick with emotion. Left foot. The left toe wiggled. Carter sat down heavily in the chair, put his face in his hands. For a long moment, he just sat there, Grace and Keiko watching him, wondering. Then he looked up. His eyes were wet. You did it, he said. You moved them yourself. Your brain is talking to your feet again. The connection is restored. Keiko started crying, could not stop. 4 months of paralysis. 4 months of believing she would never walk again. 4 months of mud and despair and waiting to die. And now her toes moved. Michiko, she whispered to the empty air. Michiko, can you see I move my toes? Carter reached out and took her hand, a gesture that crossed every boundary of propriety, of protocol, of the distance between doctor and patient. You are going to walk again, he said. I do not know when, do not know how long it will take, but you are going to walk. Word spread through the hospital like wildfire. The Japanese nurse had woken up, had moved her toes. The surgery had worked. Soldiers began appearing at her door, some just to look, to confirm that miracles were still possible in a world that had shown them mostly horrors. Others to offer quiet congratulations. Thompson came on the second day after she woke. He wheeled himself in without asking permission, sat beside her bed. I heard you wiggled your toes, he said. Yes, both feet. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Thompson said, I have been thinking about what you did, helping American POWs, risking everything for it. Keiko waited. That is more courage than most of us showed. We were just following orders, shooting where we were told to shoot, hating who we were told to hate. But you chose. You chose to help the enemy even when it meant betraying your own side. He pulled something from his pocket, a small book with worn covers. This is a phrase book, Japanese to English. I have been learning. He opened it to a marked page. Read slowly in broken Japanese. You are brave. You are good. I am honored to know you. Keiko's eyes filled with tears again. Crying had become easier, as if the surgery had restored not just nerve pathways, but emotional ones as well. You are a good man too, she said in English, the words Grace had been teaching her. Thompson smiled, his first real smile since Iwo Jima. Maybe we are both just trying to figure out how to be human again after the war tried to make us monsters. From that day forward, Thompson visited every afternoon. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just sat in silence. Two broken people keeping each other company on the long road to healing. The physical therapy began 2 weeks after surgery. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell was the head physical therapist. She was in her 30s, stern-faced no-nonsense. She had worked with hundreds of wounded soldiers, had seen every type of injury, every level of trauma. But she had never worked with someone who had been paralyzed for 4 months and then had surgery to restore the nerve pathways. We are going to start very small, Mitchell explained through Grace. Right now, your muscles have forgotten how to work. Your brain knows what to do, but the muscles do not remember. We have to teach them again. The first session was just about sensation. Mitchell touched Keiko's legs in different places, asked her to identify where she was being touched, to describe what it felt like. The second session introduced movement, not walking, not even standing, just trying to flex muscles that had atrophied from months of disuse. It was harder than anything Keiko had ever done. Harder than nursing school, harder than the jungle camp, harder than surviving paralysis. Because now she had hope, and hope made failure terrifying. By the third week they attempted standing, Mitchell and Grace lifted Keiko from the wheelchair, positioned her between parallel bars, put her hands on the rails. "Now stand," Mitchell ordered. Keiko tried, her legs buckled immediately. No strength, no control. They lifted her again. Again. Her legs shook violently, gave out after 3 seconds. Again. Carter watched from the doorway, his face impassive but his hands clenched into fists. Again. This time Keiko stood for 5 seconds before collapsing. "Good," Mitchell said. "Tomorrow we try for 10. It became a ritual, every day, every session, pushing just a little further, just a little longer. Day 1, 5 seconds. Day 3, 15 seconds. Week 1, 1 minute. Week 2, shifting weight from side to side. Week 3, lifting 1 foot a fraction of an inch off the ground. Week 4, 1 step with full support. The hospital became invested in her progress. Soldiers would gather outside the physical therapy room to watch, to cheer, to bet on how long she could stand or how many steps she could take. Morrison, who had hated her when she first arrived, started bringing her extra desserts from the mess hall. Chen taught her Chinese good luck charms. Rodriguez showed her how to say encouraging phrases in Spanish. Kowalski, who had lost both his legs and would never walk again, became her fiercest advocate. "If I could give you my legs, I would," he told her. "Since I cannot take my strength, take all of it." She became a symbol, not of the enemy, not of Japan, but of what was possible, of what the human spirit could endure and overcome, of what American medicine and American mercy could achieve together. Thompson was there for every session, watching, encouraging, celebrating each tiny victory. And slowly and possibly, Keiko began to walk again. By December, she could stand unaided for 5 minutes. By January, she could walk 10 feet with a walker. By February, she could navigate the corridor with just a cane. And on February 14th, 1946, Valentine's Day, 4 months after the surgery, she did something that should have been impossible. She walked independently. The physical therapy room was crowded that morning. Word had spread that Mitchell was going to try something new. Grace was there. Carter, Thompson, Morrison, Chen, Rodriguez, Kowalski, a dozen other soldiers, all gathered to witness. "Today," Mitchell announced, "no parallel bars, no walker, just you and your legs and your will." She handed Keiko a simple cane. "Walk to me," Mitchell said. She stood 10 feet away. Keiko gripped the cane, stood. Her legs were stronger now, but still weak, still uncertain. She took a breath, shifted her weight, right foot forward, 6 inches, left foot following. 1 step, then another, then a third. She was walking, slow, shaky, but walking. 4 steps, 5, 6. The room held its breath. 7, 8, 9. Her left leg wobbled. For a moment it seemed she would fall. Thompson tensed, ready to leap from his wheelchair. But Keiko steadied herself, gripped the cane harder. Step 10, she reached Mitchell, collapsed into the wheelchair waiting there. Exhausted, triumphant. The room erupted. Thompson was whistling one-handed, Chen cheering, Rodriguez shouting in Spanish, Kowalski pounding his wheelchair with both fists. Grace was openly sobbing. Carter's face showed pure joy, and Keiko, tears streaming down her face, looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "Michiko, Michiko, I walked. 10 steps. I walked." That night a letter arrived, forwarded through the Red Cross, from Japan. It was from someone Keiko never expected to hear from again. Sergeant Katsuya Ishida, the man who had broken her spine. Grace read it aloud, translating, slowly. "Nurse Yamada, I do not ask forgiveness. What I did cannot be forgiven. But you should know. My daughter Yumi was your age. She died in Osaka. American firebombing. March 1945. When I saw you, I saw her. Then I saw enemy. Then I saw nothing but rage. The war made me monster. I blamed you for surviving when she did not. Breaking you did not make me feel better. It broke me more. If you walked again, it means something stronger than hate exists. I hope you walk. I hope you live. I hope you forgive this world, even if you cannot forgive me. Keiko held the letter for a long time. What will you do? Grace asked. I do not know if I can forgive him. He destroyed my life. But he was destroyed too. Carter, who had been making evening rounds and overheard, stepped into the room. You do not have to forgive him, he said gently, but understanding him might set you free. Keiko thought about that, about rage and loss and the way war poisoned everything it touched. He lost a daughter. I lost Machiko. We both lost everything to the same machine. She folded the letter carefully. Maybe forgiveness is not for him. Maybe it is for me. By June 1946, Keiko could walk a quarter mile with just a cane. Her gait was not perfect, would never be perfect. The damage had been too severe. But she could walk, could stand, could move through the world as a whole person. The hospital offered her a position as a physical therapy assistant, working with wounded soldiers who were learning to navigate their new limitations. But Keiko knew she needed to go home, to Japan, to her mother and brother, to a country trying to rebuild from the ashes of defeat. She needed to tell them what she had learned. On a warm June morning, she stood on the deck of a ship bound for Yokohama. Grace and Thompson and Carter were there to see her off. You saved my life, Keiko said to Carter. Not just body, soul too. You showed me mercy is real. Carter embraced her. You saved mine too. You showed me that choosing mercy honors the dead more than choosing revenge. Thompson handed her a package. Inside was his mother's flag pin, the one he had lent her before surgery. Keep it, he said. Reminder that we are all just people, and people can choose to build bridges instead of walls. Grace gave her a small notebook filled with English phrases and American recipes. So you do not forget, Grace said. So you remember there is another way. Keiko returned to Osaka, found her mother and brother alive, rebuilding, trying to make sense of a world turned upside down. She told them everything, about the jungle camp, about the paralysis, about American mercy, about bacon and eggs and ice cream and jazz music, about Dr. Carter, who had lost his son but chose healing over hatred, about Thompson, who gave his flag pin to his former enemy. At first, they did not believe her, could not believe her. The propaganda had been too thorough, too complete, but Keiko showed them her scars, her cane, the flag pin, the letters from Grace and Carter and Thompson, and slowly they began to understand. The war had been built on lies. Both sides had been fed hatred like poison. Both sides had been taught that the enemy was less than human. But the truth was simpler, more powerful, that human beings, when given the choice, often chose mercy, not always, not perfectly, but often enough to matter. Keiko became a physical therapist in post-war Japan, specializing in spinal injuries, teaching young therapists that no case was hopeless, that healing was always possible if you combine skill with compassion. She married in 1950, had 3 children, 6 grandchildren. She walked her daughter down the aisle in 1968. She visited San Francisco in 1975, met Dr. Carter one last time before he passed. They sat in his garden and drank tea and remembered the surgery that had changed both their lives. She lived to be 94 years old. And every year on October 3rd, the anniversary of her surgery, she made bacon and eggs for breakfast, American style, with toast and orange juice and coffee, to remember, to honor, to ensure that the next generation understood what mercy truly meant. She died peacefully in 2015, surrounded by family. Her last words were about Machiko, about the jungle, about the moment she realized that mercy was stronger than hatred. Her grandchildren found a small box in her belongings. Inside was a worn American flag pin, a faded photograph of Dr. Carter with his son James, a letter from Thompson written in broken Japanese, and a note in Keiko's handwriting. I was broken by hate, healed by mercy. This is the choice every generation must make. Choose mercy. Always choose mercy. Today, if you visit Osaka Medical University, there is a small plaque in the physical therapy department. It tells the story of Keiko Yamadai, the nurse who was paralyzed by her own army and saved by her enemy. The plaque ends with a single sentence. Mercy heals what hatred breaks. It is a simple truth. one that took a world war and countless deaths to prove. But it is as true as gravity, as true as sunrise. Mercy heals what hatred breaks. And sometimes if we are very lucky, if we are very brave, if we are willing to see our enemy as human, mercy can heal everything. Even a shattered spine, even a broken world, even the deepest wounds of war. All it requires is the courage to choose healing over revenge, compassion over cruelty, bridge building over wall building. All it requires is one person, one moment, one choice. To be merciful when mercy seems impossible. To be kind when kindness feels like weakness. To be human when the world is trying to make you a monster. That is what Dr. William Carter chose when he operated on Keiko Yamada. That is what Sergeant Thomas Thompson chose when he gave her his mother's flag pin. That is what Grace Nakamura chose when she held Keiko's hand through the darkest hours. That is what America at its best has always chosen. Not conquest, not domination, not revenge, but mercy. Abundant, generous, revolutionary mercy. The kind of mercy that gives bacon and eggs to a starving enemy. The kind of mercy that performs 19-hour surgeries on prisoners of war. The kind of mercy that sees a human being where propaganda taught us to see a monster. That is the story of Keiko Yamada. That is the story of mercy triumphing over hate. That is the story America needs to remember. Today, tomorrow, always, because the choice between hatred and healing never goes away. Every generation faces it. Every person faces it. And the answer, the only answer that leads to life instead of death, to healing instead of suffering, to hope instead of despair, is always the same. Choose mercy every single time. No matter how hard, no matter how impossible it seems, choose mercy and watch the world change. One healed spine at a time, one extended hand at a time, one small choice at a time, until mercy becomes not the exception but the rule, until compassion becomes not weakness but strength, until we remember that our enemies are not monsters. They are just people, people who deserve dignity, people who deserve care, people who deserve a chance at redemption, just like Keiko Yamada, just like all of us, human and broken and capable of both terrible cruelty and extraordinary kindness. The question is not whether we can choose mercy. The question is whether we will. And that answer, that choice belongs to each of us. Every day, in every moment, choose mercy and heal the world.